Hey guys, did you know that there was a killer release between Night and Singularity in the March of 2023? Yeah, according to some unverified sources, there was actually a killer in this release window. She's just been memory holed up everybody's brain space, kind of like PTB background player, moon offerings, and whatever the hell Freddy used to do. Neither the player base or the devs seem to want to remember that she exists, or want you to remember either. Talking of course about the Brazilian billionaire bad bitch herself, Adriana Imai, the Skull Merchant. Anybody who knows me knows I love this killer. She's my special favourite killer and has been since October 2023, when they reworked her out of the infamous 3-gen chess merchant era and into what I've come to call Merchant 2.0, where her drones project scan lines detecting survivors and gradually locking onto them to build up towards a remote injury. Even at the peak of her player count, Skull Merchant was never the most popular killer the game has ever seen, but over the last 9 months or so, us Skull Merchants have been a dying breed out there in the fog. Anyone who plays a lot of Survivor will tell you that you see Merchant about as often as you see Twins, Hag or Cenobite these days. That is extremely infrequently, and it is not really a secret as to why. Skull Merchant is the closest thing that Dead by Daylight has right now to a dead killer, and that's including the one that you can't buy. She is the worst killer in the game, or at least down there with Trapper, and in normal cases you'd think this would warrant extreme buffs, the kind of thing you'd expect a killer to get after this long. But the reality is a little more complicated than that. Today we're going to be taking a look at what happened to this killer since behaviour comprehensively gutted her in the October of last year. Breaking down all the problems she's got right now, many of which are unrelated to the actual balance state of the killer, and look for a way forward so that my and many others' favourite killer can be the best and most interesting version of herself that she can be. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to whatever the fuck is going on with Skull Merchant. Most people here should know about my love affair with this killer, but I know the game's had a ton of new players lately who might not know the history here, and the channel's had a few newcomers too, so I'll give you the cliff notes of Skull Merchant's history in this game. When she first released, I described her as a suit that felt like it was made for me, but didn't quite fit anyway, and that applied to basically every area of her design. But as the months proceeded, the changes to her kept making her more and more enticing to me. Her base design had some problems for sure, but the idea of a rich egomaniac slasher using modern technology resulted in a fantastic wardrobe of cosmetics. Her base lore didn't properly showcase the interesting parts of her character, but she got a really satisfying follow-up tome to patch up the holes. And within half a year of her release, her power got a full rework, which was desperately needed. On launch, Skull Merchant had one of the worst power designs ever committed to code, and it enabled generators to be held hostage for up to an hour. And aside from some add-ons that turned her into Diet Clown, she couldn't even really do anything else properly either. But the rework resonated with me in a way that no killer power has ever done, before or since. I would consider Skull Merchant's rework in patch 7.3.0 to be a mixed bag, which is probably a kinder description than most people would use to describe what we got here. Contrary to what many would have you believe, there was quite a bit to like about Merchant 2.0, the first of which being that it wasn't Merchant 1.0. Many people have said that Merchant 2.0 made games miserable, and they're within their prerogative to believe that if they wish, but Merchant 1.0 made the game non-functional. Her primary and only real tool was to grind the game to a halt by giving her perfect gen control and information at the cost of basically everything else. Merchant 2.0 had a much more well-rounded kit, having less focus on short-range information and being flat-out incapable of detecting survivors on generators, in exchange for having far more chase lethality and claw traps more consistently detecting survivors over longer distances. Once behaviour added features like the drone's beam spawning consistently exactly where you were aiming when deploying them, and allowing the killer to switch the drone rotation direction manually, we had a killer on our hands with a ton of moving parts. And it wasn't long before raging autists like myself tried to figure out how to break this killer. And break her, we did. After extensive testing in public matches and custom games, I and other Merchant players found a shit ton of depth to her that most of the community had no idea about, and to this day, mostly still don't understand. There was so much there that when I compiled it into a guide, the original Grandmaster's Guide to Skull Merchant, the guide ran for over 90 minutes. It's my longest ever video, and honestly I think there were some bits that I glazed over. It probably should have gone on longer. She was, and to some degree still is, a very unique killer with a really rewarding learning curve and a surprisingly high skill ceiling. But that doesn't mean she didn't have any problems, because, oh boy did she have some problems. The idea behind Merchant 2.0 in theory is that you'd set up maybe 3 or 4 of your drones in high traffic areas, where they would rotate and scan survivors who entered and tried to loop in these areas. But many Merchant players found it far easier to just drop drones in tiles and let the drone's 2 rotating beams do the rest, forcing survivors to leave the tile immediately or take passive lock-on stacks and eventually die if they committed to the tile for too long. This playstyle, which came to be known as Shit a Drone, was incredibly easy to do, for how effective it was to just shit a drone into a tile, and most Merchant players simply didn't bother engaging with her more skill-expressive elements. It wasn't overpowered or even particularly good, it was just very easy for the killer and very awkward for the survivors to play around, and that made her hated by huge swaths of the community, many of whom still hadn't recovered from the damage that 3-gen Merchant had done. It didn't help that a lot of her value came from a barrage of status effects. She applied Broken, Hinder, and sometimes a Deep Wound through the course of a chase, and benefited from a burst of Undetectable when a drone was deployed, as well as a constant trickle of haste that scaled with the number of survivors scanned by drones at once. This made for a killer who was complicated, confusing, and way too easy to play, and that's a surefire recipe to make a killer who's hated to play against. Her kill rate was sky high as a result, both because she was far easier to play than she was to play against, and because survivors frequently went next on hook or disconnected as soon as they realised which killer they were playing against. This was obviously unsustainable, but for a whole year, behaviour just left her the way she was. No attempts to rebalance her once the rework dropped, she got a UX change that made drone beams white when a survivor was immune to them, but no actual balance adjustments for a year, even as other killers like Chucky and Hillbilly got constant balance changes throughout that year. That is, of course, until the autumn of 2024, when behaviour decided enough was enough, and the great nerfing began. The PTB for patch 8.3.0 saw major changes to the Skull Merchant, and the statement of intent could be summed up in this line here. Decrease the number of scan lines to 1 was 2. Regardless of anything else, that's literally cutting her power in half. It means half as much coverage where a drone is set up as a trap. It means there's half as many areas in a tile where a survivor is at risk of being scanned, just halving everything she could do with her power. This might sound weird in hindsight, but on principle at least, I think this was a pretty solid change actually. Her biggest issue by a mile was her low skill floor, and that was a direct result of the 2 beams making dodging or evading the beams unnecessarily difficult, encouraging the killer to never interact with their own power and let the passive scanning do the work for you. This wasn't the only good change either. The passive haste that you got for basically existing at all got removed, which made playing the standard M1 killer game against her much more intuitive for the survivors, because the speed that she moved at remained consistent and easier to read. Those were reductions to her power in places that at least made sense. They directly address some of her biggest pain points in ways that still let you use the power for skillful and fun stuff that the people who mastered the killer, like me, really enjoyed. But let's not forget, these are still big nerfs to a killer who was only really low B or high C tier before the nerfs. But I'm sure she could still be okay as long as she's properly maintained and compensated for those nerfs and given some more power back in other areas. So of course behaviour responded by nerfing her 5 more times. The value on Merchant's Hinder was nerfed from 10% to 5% on the PTB, a value that made her power so bad it was literally worse than bloodlusting and not using your power at all, before being compromised to 8% for their live release. Stealth mode was straight up removed, so her beams are permanently visible now. Her movement speed dropped to 110% when she held out her radar and when deploying a drone, and survivors would be immune to being scanned while fast vaulting windows and pallets, a knee-jerk nerf that came out of nowhere between PTB and live. Admittedly, one of these nerfs did get wound back, and she did get a small amount of compensation. She got a tiny sliver of the haste that she lost back, and got a couple of add-ons partially added to her base kit, but it was not even in the same universe as enough to justify the thorough obliteration of most of her power, especially because the add-ons she got partially base kit also got nerfed in the process. The effect a nerf this pronounced had on a killer who was already not the greatest was obvious and predictable. Merchant became the worst killer in the game, or at least in competition for the worst, pretty much overnight. We all knew this would happen as soon as we saw it on the PTB. We warned behaviour that this would effectively neuter the killer, and they went ahead and did it anyway. And the effect this had on the community was definitely pronounced. The way I see it, the community split into 3 chunks. Obviously, the merchant players were flabbergasted. This isn't the kind of thing behaviour does very often. The balance team tends to balance characters with the intention of, making them balanced. So such a comprehensive gutting of a character was kind of unheard of. On the other side, you had merchant haters, the Aarons of the world, who saw Skull Merchant as the boogeyman of DBD, and celebrated behaviour taking up the sword and slaying the monster they'd grown to hate over the past year. But there was a third group, let's call them the Scott Jund category, where they didn't feel strongly about the character herself, or might even have disliked her, but still acknowledged how egregious the over-nerfing was and how much of a bad precedent it set. You didn't have to like Merchant to understand that the nerfs were overboard. Wildly so, and a lot of players expressed concern about what this scorched earth balancing approach represented for the future. Mains of other disliked killers, especially Plague, Pinhead and Chucky, started to panic as soon as their killers got name dropped for future changes, because the haters had gotten Skull Merchant flogged to death in the town square, and for all they knew, their killers were next. Thankfully, those fears have been mostly unfounded so far, and the closest we got to a second Skull Merchanting of a killer was some poorly thought out Xenomorph changes that never made it off the PTB. That is, until the recent PTB, which saw some questionable changes to Knight and Clown. Clown was at least given an alternative playstyle, even though it sucks, but Knight has been effectively decimated by the changes on the PTB. He's an atrocious killer now. But at the very least, it's clear that, in a similar way to Xenomorph, the Knight changes were not expected to be as devastating as they were. Behaviour didn't intend to kill him the same way they intended to kill Merchant, and that's why I doubt these changes will make it to live. So at least for now, the deliberate and long-term destruction of a killer in the way that Merchant got has yet to be replicated. Although with the massive backlash Kaneki has received, taking Merchant's crown as the most hated killer in the game, every Kaneki player I know is quaking in their boots right now. Because if they're willing to butcher a C-tier killer that no one played because people complained about them too much, imagine what they'll do to a killer who's very popular to play while also being insanely strong. In any case, for Merchant herself, this new existence down in the shit pit of D tier would be her fate for the next 9 months. Every tier list everybody has made since the Great Nerfening has put her either at the worst killer in the game, or competing for the bottom spot with Trapper. There has been more or less zero work done from behaviour to try and correct this, and to understand why we need to look at the reasons for the nerfs in the first place. When behaviour was originally pressed for the reasons behind these heavy nerfs, community manager Mandy Talk popped up on the forums to talk about Merchant's kill rate, and it was, as expected, insanely high. Well into the 70% threshold or higher, which is well above behaviour's target of a 60% kill rate. Naturally, it was inflated on some level by people who gave up on Hook or disconnected, and through the game not just for themselves, but for their entire team. But it was still well above behaviour's acceptable levels, and so changes needed to happen. And in that respect, I will agree, she definitely did need changes, and I made multiple videos talking about the changes that I would make. But the changes she got were so far in excess of what she actually needed that her kill rate was high just isn't a good enough excuse anymore. Behaviour knows that high kill rates don't necessarily make a character overpowered and in need of sledgehammer nerfs. Vecna had the highest kill rate in the game at 66% as of the last stats drop, which isn't that far behind what Merchant was back in the day. And this was right before Vecna got a fairly substantial buff. The balance team applied nuance and thought to Vecna's changes, and to more powerful killers with lower kill rates like Nurse in the other direction, but didn't do so to Merchant. And if you want to know why, I have this clip here from Otofu's stream that might fill you in.
But it could be that, right? It could be like, okay, look, we need like a bigger rework, and until that happens, let's just like make her not like unbearable to play against, even if that means making her weak. You know what I mean? Because honestly, that's fine. Oh, did they? Did they say that? Did they say that somewhere here? I don't think. Wait, where did they say that? I did say that. Oh, let's go. Never mind then. Let's go. Pog. Okay, I mean, if that's the idea, then I'm all for it. That's fine then. Because I feel like I don't think this is like a good long-term direction, right? But if this is like a short-term solution just to hold everyone off and make the game better for people, because I do think Skull Merchant's like the #1 most complained about thing right now. So like, if you're just like, okay, let's just make her weaker, even if she's like becomes a horrible killer to play, whatever, like, let's just make her like not miserable to go against until we can then make her better in the future. I actually like that a lot, because this is intended. We're going to be reworking her to get her to a healthy place for both sides.
Yeah, Mandy just gave us the outright admission that Merchant was intentionally overkill to quiet complaints down until a rework comes. This wasn't hard to work out when they immediately confirmed Merchant was due for a rework alongside the truckload of nerfs she got. But this is still saying the quiet part out loud, and the casual admission of this in Tofu's stream, alongside the refusal to admit this publicly on the forums in front of people who were asking about it, as part of the update or the patch notes, didn't give the best impression, shall we say. But you know, we've got that rework coming, right? Thanks to Mandy, we got an appropriate release window for that rework, second half of 2025, and that's where we are right now. So that rework probably is coming any minute now, right? 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 The rework will almost certainly be late. I say almost certainly because Behaviour hasn't given a formal announcement and anything could happen, but all the evidence that we have suggests that we're waiting a while, and if it does come on time, I will be nothing short of stunned. My biggest source of doubt is the design previews that we got to showcase Behaviour's vision for her rework. And let's set aside what's actually in those for a moment and talk about how long it took Behaviour to get these out. The rework was announced in September 2024, and our first design preview didn't drop until 6 months later in March 2025. We then had to wait 5 weeks for the second preview based on our feedback, which is over twice as long as we were originally supposed to wait. And a few weeks after that we were told, yeah, well, we're taking it back to the drawing board. More news at some point, somewhere, probably. Well, that's informative, isn't it? We spent 9 months going from the planning stages to these very charming MS Paint drawings, to a write-up and community feedback post, and then all the way back to the drawing board again. In other words, we're more or less back where we started almost a year ago, because for the first 6 months of the Great Nerfening, we had nothing to go on. Improvements were not being made. We were just twiddling our thumbs waiting for the first design preview. If you ask me, the first design preview should have come alongside the nerfs, whether that means working on the design preview earlier, or holding off on the nerfs for a few patch cycles until you get the preview ready. By intentionally overkilling a character and then waiting 6 months before you take the first steps towards starting to fix them, it broadcasts that you nerfed the character out of the blue without actually having a plan to fix her. Because if you had a plan, you wouldn't have had to wait 6 months to show us that plan. It's so incredibly arse backwards, and it speaks to either a lack of care by the people in charge of this rework, or some really shoddy management decisions made by a Behaviour higher up. Either way, something has gone very badly wrong, and we the community are paying the price for that. Unless Behaviour seriously gets their shit together, we don't have time to go from the planning stages to a design preview to an internal dev build to a PTB to a live release between now and December, when the last update of the year comes out. It took 6 months to get to the MS Paint stages the first time round. We're not building an entire rework in 5, especially because when it comes to reworks and ambitious live design, Merchant is not the only priority anymore. The Grimoire opening every 2 weeks is likely keeping everybody at Behaviour busy, from community managers to visual artists and animators to live design teams, and that's the 10th anniversary chapter. That is an all hands on deck mission under an insane time crunch and a deadline that cannot be moved. And Trix's reworks is becoming along as well. Behaviour has committed to a proper rework instead of a revert, which implies they know what they're going to do with him. They wouldn't commit to something like that if they weren't beyond the planning stage, which automatically means Trix's rework is further along in development than Merchant's, and will therefore likely release first. Between the Grimoire, Trickster, and the quality of life changes that will be defining the second half of the year, Merchant will inevitably slip down the priority list. We will miss that deadline, and the earliest I can imagine we'll get that rework will be in the May mid-chapter just before 10th anniversary, but I could see it taking potentially much longer with Behaviour's current workload and pace. I have mixed feelings about this. On one hand, it does suck that the process is taking so long, because the killer will invariably remain shit for this lengthy duration. But on the other hand, this whole process will be worth it in the end if the rework we get is good, and iterating on the design previews isn't a process that you can really rush up to a certain point. I'm glad they took extra time to consult the community about these design previews, especially given what was actually in them. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the mechanical points of failure of the 2 proposed reworks in the Skull Merchant design preview, because I've already gone over them in exhaustive, and I do mean exhaustive, detail. Instead, I'm going to come at it from a different angle. These design previews, especially the first one, went out of their way to keep as little of the killer's previous gameplay and mechanical identity as possible, with the first design preview even outright acknowledging that existing Merchant players will probably be unhappy about what's being proposed. That's how you know you're in for an exciting design preview, when the first thing they do is alienate the core player base before even telling you how many drones she has now. On some level, I have to respect the balls behind it. Yeah, this character's core audience will probably hate this idea we've had, but if we publish it anyway, they might get shouted down enough by the community at large that we can ignore them and get away with it anyway. It was a bold strategy, but even aside from the assassination of Skull Merchant as a killer in this game, the idea itself they had to replace her was so fundamentally cooked, they eventually had to scrap it anyway. These design previews, and specifically their focus on the drone propulsion mechanic, felt like a giant middle finger to the existing Merchant player base, because it came at the tail end of a year chock full of dash killers, and the drone propulsion mechanic was just turning Merchant into another one. My behaviour in Christ, if we wanted to play a dash killer instead of Skull Merchant, trust me, we'd be doing it already. It's not like you haven't given us enough choice. It's worth noting that the design previews ultimately going nowhere meant that they haven't impacted Merchant's live version or balance state whatsoever. If you don't pay attention to the dev update and just spend your time in game itself, looking at your iPhone and getting 3-outed, you might not even know the design previews were happening. But for somebody invested in this character, the previews represented a far more existential threat than the pile of nerfs did, because the nerfs release understood to be temporary. They're a stopgap for a more comprehensive fix, and besides, you can still have fun with a killer even though she's giga dogshit, because most of the killer's actual mechanics are still intact. If you like drone rotation fuckery, or laser tagging, or stack tracking, or the other things that make this killer special, you can still do them. You'll probably just lose in the process. And when you're playing a killer this bad, every win feels deserved. With the proposed new iterations, everything that made Merchant special was gone. There was nothing left to bury of the killer we know and love, and Behaviour thought it was a good idea to push that as their rework concept twice. So now it's just a waiting game. We don't know how long it's going to be until the next design preview, and we don't know what's actually going to be in it. We don't know whether the next step of iterating on this rework will be the one that saves the killer, or the one that drives her even further into the ground. And I'm talking about this now because I've noticed a level of resentment and bitterness among many Merchant enthusiasts in my community and outside of it, towards the wider Dead by Daylight community and the devs alike. I've wanted to make the video for a while now talking about this because the mood has just been so down lately, and I feel like this has to be addressed by somebody. Let's not forget that ever since the character's earliest days, the Merchant player base has received non-stop harassment from many players. Literally, ask anyone who's played Merchant the past couple of years, and they will tell you about the absolute vitriol they've received for the crime of playing a killer they like. I submitted a report ticket recently of a Sable player telling me to kill myself for 3 minutes solid, and a friend of mine, Vindruva, was even doxed once for streaming Skull Merchant gameplay and has to stream with a VPN now. We've been getting the message from players that we're just not welcome here, that we should play a different killer, or just, well. So when the devs broadcast to us that the way we like to play the game just isn't something that they care to preserve, and they'd rather spend their efforts destroying the character than trying to improve her, understandably, that doesn't feel great. Merchant players have been the community's punching bag since she came out, so it shouldn't be surprising that we get bitter and upset when the devs decide to get a few punches in as well. When you look at it from a purely logical perspective, the two issues aren't relevant to each other strictly. It's obvious that the devs aren't nerfing or reworking the killer because people are complaining at and harassing her players. The two are correlated, but not causally linked. But that doesn't make being on the receiving end of it any better. Merchant players have no reason to believe that the devs are operating in the interest of actually making their game better, because if they were, they wouldn't have nerfed her so hard. They would have buffed her back up a bit since then, or the design previews wouldn't have been so unashamed in wanting her entire power demolished. So, no wonder we're all bitter and angry about it. And the worst part is, something happened recently that made talking about this issue like a grown-up so much more challenging, because some monumental shitbags took an ultimately harmless joke way too fucking far. You know, every anniversary has these quotes from developers at the start of the loading screen? Well, one of them recently cropped up from a dev whose name and job will remain unidentified, and it said quite offhandedly that, nah, they didn't like Skull Merchant either. This picture made the rounds across social media and caused a bit of a stir. Some people thought the joke was great, but others struggled to see the funny side. My quote tweet of the image, joking about putting it in a thumbnail, got well over 2,000 likes. This image went triple platinum in the community, but as I'm sure you've noticed, I've had to censor the developer and their role in this image because, well, What do you think happened next? A small group of absolute brainlets decided to harass that developer for this comment. They found her Twitter account and tagged it, demanding that she get fired from her job, made horrible comments about her appearance, and this resulted in that developer privating their account. They make this as unambiguous as possible. If you are one of those brainlets who harassed her in any way, shape or form, you are disgusting. I hope you feel disgusting, and I don't want you in my community. It's just that simple, I'm afraid. Harassing game developers is absolutely beyond the pale. It is the lowest of the low shitbag thing to do, and it's impossible to justify in any circumstances, least of all an innocuous joke in an anniversary loading screen from a dev who isn't even part of the Balance or Live design teams. And that's not even the end of the bullshit, because not only were these clowns harassing a dev for a joke, I've been dragged into this whole fracas, personally by name, and copped a fair share of harassment and slander myself in the process. There were a couple of people claiming that I harassed the dev, or sent others to do it, and people left thoroughly unpleasant comments on my YouTube videos and lurked my Twitter replies like a goblin, spreading this fabrication to anyone who would listen. Let me make a few things clear. I didn't tag or mention the dev by name ever. In fact, I knew the developer's Twitter account already and deliberately didn't mention them or tag them in anything because I didn't want to risk something like this happening. As soon as I knew what was going on, I immediately told everyone to knock it off in multiple tweets and replies throughout the day, and made it abundantly fucking clear that participating in it or justifying the harassment of a dev is not acceptable. I kind of want to put this to bed now because this is not what this video is meant to be about, but I felt I had to address it publicly because if I didn't, then just let people continue to harass or smear me, and I don't want to give them that opportunity. If this somehow finds its way to the dev herself who posted this, I am really sorry that it escalated in the way that it did, and for any role my quote tweet played in that. It's genuinely heartbreaking that some complete bellends decided to go after you for the crime of making a joke they didn't like. And I hope you're doing okay, despite everything. Nobody wins from a situation like this. Not only has an innocent dev been targeted and harassed into privating their social media, not only have I had to remove half a dozen shitheads from my YouTube comments and Twitter replies, but the ability to actually discuss in good faith the poisoned relationship between merchant fans and the community at large has itself been poisoned by bad actors who just don't know how to treat people on the internet. This entire discourse around merchant has become so toxic on all levels from all sides, and I'm just trying to do my best to help put that right, to try and set the record straight and communicate the issues we're having as reasonably as I can. At this point, the merchant playerbase's trust in behaviour is at rock bottom, because almost every action that's been taken with regards to the killer since the rework has been a mistake, and we have no reason to believe that things will ever get better. So with that in mind, what could better actually look like? The way I see it, we're staring down three separate problems here. The short-term problem of the killer being unspeakably dogshit for an interminably long time, the long-term problem of the proposed reworks looking to destroy the killer altogether, and the harder to quantify but more insidious problem of the rampantly toxic relationship between merchant players and basically everyone else in the community. Fixing all three of these issues is key to making this killer feel like a proper part of the game again, and doing so I think is a cooperative effort between devs and players. I can't say that I've got all the solutions. I'm not Skull Merchant Jesus, even though I do have the hair and the martyr complex and the delusions of grandeur, but this is what I would recommend for the future if we're going to save the Skull Merchant. Let's start by talking about the rework, which is the most important thing to get right, because it will define what the killer will play like forever. Hopefully it will be the last rework she'll ever get, so they'd better stick the landing on this one. The most important thing that behaviour can do with regards to the rework is stop trying to remove the killer's identity to appease people who are just going to hate her anyway. If the reaction to Merchant 2.0, and especially the last 9 months, have proven anything, it's that completely rebuilding the character will not stop people hating her for what she used to be. It won't stop them refusing to understand what she does now, because we've already tried it once. A lot of people still act like she can 3-gen, or that she exposes you, or that she has a base kit palette break, like she did in the 1.0 era over 2 years ago. They don't know how the beams or the lock-on stack systems work because they've only been against her twice in the past year and their teammates go up on hook both times. That level of ignorance, especially from more invested players, is willful on some level. There are plenty of resources available to understand how this killer works. I should know because I made half of them. And she's not the most complicated killer in the game by any metric. There are plenty of others whose powers make a whole lot less sense at first glance. While you can definitely make a power simpler to understand, people choosing to remain ignorant out of largely spite isn't something that you can change or modify a killer's design. A killer's rework should prioritise the players who already enjoy them, because they're your core player base for the new version of the character. They are the ones who've already invested money and time and blood points and effort into the character. They're the ones with the most to lose in the changes, and so far both the design previews have actively and knowingly rejected those players, in favour of a hypothetical player base that you're just sort of hoping manifests itself over time. Removing the stack and scan system, the drone rotation mechanics, and trap killer playstyle completely is the equivalent of reworking Huntress and getting rid of her ability to throw hatchets, and instead using them as climbing axes to climb up walls. Oh, but she still has axes and a lullaby, so, she's basically the same killer, right? Hopefully they've learned from the mistakes of the prior design previews, but until we get a new one, we won't know for sure. But here's where we merchant fans have to manage our expectations, because behaviour can cook a good rework. They've done it with Knight, they've done it with Freddy. It is within their capacity to make a good merchant rework, but it is not within their capacity to do it quickly. Yes, they should have come out the gate with the design previews much sooner, but what's done is done. We can't go back and change that now. And behaviour has so much on their plate at the moment that I don't think it's reasonable to demand they drop everything to get the rework done, especially because it would be a concerted effort from several different teams at once, like live design, back-end programming, VFX and animation artists, community managers. They're going to miss the deadline they gave us. That sucks. But we've just got to accept it and take the next design preview when it comes, whenever that may be. I'm sure we'd all rather them take longer to make something great than to rush out something mediocre. I'll be ending the video later with my newest rework concept that I posted on the DVD forums in the design preview thread, but we're going to have to move on for now and talk about the short-term balance state of the killer, the thing that's actively pressing on players right now, because the longer the rework takes to cook, the longer we're going to have to live with Merchant being the queen of D tier. This is something it's completely within Behaviour's power to change. She's already been shit Merchant for longer than she was ever chess Merchant. And if the second rework doesn't come by the March chapter release next year, the shit merchant era will be longer than the chess merchant era and pre-nerf reworked merchant eras combined. Keeping a killer intentionally that terrible for that length of time is just not acceptable, especially when you give a deadline for fixing her that you then miss. What merchant needs to tide her over this interminably long wait until the rework hits is some interim buffs. Unfortunately, she's so shit right now that you could buff almost anything about the character without risking making her overpowered or obnoxious. You could revert the fast vault immunity change altogether because she was shit on the PTB even without that extra nerf. You could increase drone rotation speed again, baseline, you could give her a few extra drones, you could reduce the drone deployment time to make laser tagging more viable, you could revert her hinder back to 10% base kit, you could make the transition undetectable smoother so that her terror rate dissipates instantly rather than fading out. There are so many options for safe buffs to this killer that would let her be marginally better for the long period we're going to have to wait until this rework. And don't give me the, oh, we just don't have time. You guys changed Chucky every 2 weeks last year. Balance team definitely has time to make numbers adjustments here or there. This topic is where the player base has to start making some noise. We know that rework isn't coming for ages, so if we want buffs to our killer to tide us over in the meantime, we need to push for them now, and be as loud and clear and specific as we can about what we want. If you want to play the killer but you're put off because she's too shit to function now, let Behaviour know on the forums, in Reddit threads or in Twitter replies. Merchant's pick rate right now is lower than it's ever been, and part of that is admittedly just Springtrap pulling every other killer's pick rates down a lot, but Behaviour have to understand that it's not her complexity that puts people off of playing her. It's the chronic shitness they've imposed on her that's hurting the character so badly, and that's where we come in. It's just not acceptable to leave a killer this bad for this long through a series of intentional overnerfs and, missing an important deadline. And the only way we can do anything about it is by making some noise about it. Respectfully, of course, I hate that I have to reiterate telling you not to fucking harass devs, but apparently I do. But the third issue is the most complex of the lot, and that is the toxicity problem. How can we start to mend such a divisive relationship between the players and the devs? From Behaviour's end, there's not a lot they can do beyond just fixing the first two problems. People are bitter because the killer isn't being properly maintained. So properly maintaining the killer should make the problem largely solve itself. But that does take time. The only thing behaviour could really do to cool things down now, and extend an olive branch to the merchant players at the moment, is just be a bit more honest with us about what's going on right now. Trust in the behaviour team is at an all-time low from the merchant fans, and there's a lot of big questions that could do with clear answers to help restore that trust. Questions like, why did the first set of design previews take so long to come out after the nerfs hit? How long are we going to have to wait before the next design preview hits? And how far back does that push the Rework's ETA? Why are you so keen to remove the skill expression, mechanical identity, and fun of the killer, like laser tagging, rotation timing, and stack management? Do you just not know that merchant players like these things? Or is there a problem with these elements that makes them not worth even trying to salvage? And perhaps most pressingly, if you are dead set on removing the elements of Skull Merchant that make her fun to her players, what do you expect those players to do next? Are you going to make more trap killers now? Or make the existing ones more appealing through buffs and changes? Are we going to get more killers with mechanics similar to Merchant's drone rotation so our skills become transferable to that character? Or are we just supposed to shut up and play dash killers and spring trap instead? Because let me remind you, there are shit tons of characters like that. If we wanted to be playing those characters instead of Merchant, we'd be playing them already. At this point, we have no reason to trust that the devs are operating in our best interests. We have every indication to the contrary, and the only way that can be rectified is honesty and open discussion. Because if you make a ton of very messy public mistakes, and then leave people to speculate about what's going on and why, they're always going to assume the worst of you. But regardless of what behaviour does going forwards, the onus is largely on the community at large to improve community relations from disgruntled merchant players and frustrated merchant haters alike. And the answer is very, very simple. Just don't be dicks to people. You'll meet people in this community who love playing merchant and talking about her, and you'll meet people who will hate her too. And both of these things are okay. Nobody has to like or dislike the things that you do, and that's not a personal insult to you. Granted, it doesn't mean that you can't try to show people things from your point of view, or call out obvious bullshit when you see it, but there has to be a goal of dialogue, and coming to a mutual understanding. And if you run into the people who can't be convinced, who can't act normal and just have a chip on their shoulder, don't engage. Whether they're screeching about a killer they've played against twice and vaguely remember from a Hens video 2 years ago, or whether they're harassing game developers because they made an unfunny joke, they are not worth your time or your breath. I definitely rise to stuff more than I should do, but I've also been having productive discussions with community figures like Scott Jund, Tofu, and Spooky Loops. So, let's do more of that. These conversations were a lot of fun. We were able to figure out what was wrong with the character, correct the record on some common misconceptions, and these discussions and a lot of brainstorming took me to this. My newest rework for Skull Merchant 3.0. It's designed to combine elements from all three versions of Skull Merchant. The active zones and information collection of her release version, the trap killer playstyle, the stack and scan system, and unique mechanical depth of the second version, and the moving drones and EMP darts taken from the iterations in the design previews. All three flavours of Skull Merchant, mixed together and served in a single scoop. Yep, the Neapolitan is back, baby. It's new and improved, and since this rework will seemingly take ages, they actually have time to make something with the complexity that a rework like this one would demand. I submitted this on the forums, in the reply to the second design preview, and I'd love to see what you guys think of it. Skull Merchant carries 6 drones. Skull Merchant's drones have 3 states: Recon mode, Stealth mode, and Scouting mode. Drones deploy in Recon mode. You press M2 to deploy a drone, drawing a Night Guard style path for the drone to follow. This has a far higher speed and maximum range than a guard. When the path is drawn, the Recon mode drone will fly out from you and follow that path at 200% speed. These drones don't emit beams, and instead emit a 10 meter radius active zone in a circle around the drone. Any survivor who moves inside the active zone will be revealed on the radar for as long as they're in it and for 12 seconds lingering afterwards. At the end of its path, a recon drone will make a noise, and then pause for 10 seconds before flying straight back to the killer at 200% speed, through walls, through floors, directly towards you. While a recon drone is moving to its destination, or while it's waiting there, selecting it on the radar will cause it to stop moving at once and enter stealth mode. This can only be done after a few seconds in flight. You can't do it instantly, so shit a drone isn't going to happen. The idea behind Recon Mode is to combine the best bits of Merchant 1 and 3 by changing how she sets the drones up. For current era Merchant, she has to walk to wherever she wants the drone to be and put the drone there. But on this new version, she pre-selects the path, and the drone flying over to it gives her information on the way there, and can set it up as a remote trap without having to worry about actually going there herself. Of course, survivors who aren't moving can't be seen, just like the current era, so they provide good information and trap distribution at all ranges without having the perfect close-range information that made Chess Merchant possible. When a drone enters stealth mode, you gain control of it for 8 seconds. You can't move it around during this time, but you can control the orientation, and the scan line will appear on a crosshair. You press M1 to lock the scan line in position, firing a 10-meter long blue beam for a split second. Any survivor hit by the blue beam will receive 3 lock-on stacks. If 8 seconds passes or you cancel the power, the drone will return to your inventory. Stealth mode drones will remain where they're locked in place once this direction is locked. They won't rotate, and they'll project one scan line in the direction that blue beam fired in. The scan line will look like the stubby little yellow beam from the first design preview. When a survivor moves through a stealth mode beam without crouching, they gain 1 lock-on stack, and the drone enters scouting mode. The idea with the new stealth mode is to combine 2 critical parts of Merchant 2.0 in a natural feeling way: trap drones and laser tagging. The primary use case here is remote surveillance and trap placement. You send a drone somewhere, it doesn't spot anyone, so you stop it at the spot you want it to stay in, and choose a direction that it will face in. The drone then gets to vibe there as a tripwire in stealth mode until the drone is either disabled, recalled, or enters scouting mode. But there's a fun little minigame if the recon drone spots somebody as it's moving. As soon as you spot someone on the radar, that's your opportunity to switch to the drone and take a quick laser shot before they can react. If you miss your blue beam, you'll pay a steep cost. You wasted sending your drone where you wanted it to go, and they might disable it before you can get there, which is why giving a full claw trap and ignoring crouching or standing rules apply to this particular beam. It's higher risk, higher reward, and it could maybe have some nice sound or visual effects to highlight this, like a big flashing blue beam for a split second with a siren or a special beep to let the survivor know they messed up, that the killer is coming for them, and they best get out of dodge before she decorates the trial with their innards. But if there's nobody there to hit with the blue beam, your aim just becomes a way to orient that tripwire, and statically monitor an area in stealth mode until you scan a survivor and enter scouting mode. Scouting mode drones rotate clockwise at 110 degrees per second. Any survivor scanned by a beam who isn't crouching or standing still will receive a lock-on stack, basically just the same as regular drones are now. The Skull Merchant can change the rotation direction of a scouting mode drone at any time, so you still have the whole rotation switching skill dynamic that 2.0 Merchant had, and whenever the Skull Merchant recalls a stealth or scouting drone, she gets undetectable for 10 seconds. Survivors can interact with the stealth or scouting drone and perform minigame to hack the drone for 45 seconds. Once this period is over, which will cause the drone's aura to flash yellow to the killer, the Skull Merchant can either recall the drone back to her inventory, or reorient it, putting it back into stealth mode, taking a new shot with the blue beam, and reorienting the tripwire. The scouting and disabled states are much the same as they are in current Merchant. Scouting mode drones spin the one beam really fucking fast, and take 3 scans to claw trap you. And the killer can rotation switch to do this faster, you can crouch or stand still to avoid it, la-di-da-di-da. And you disable in the same way as well, with the same 45 seconds time limit. But the big difference here is that you have to manually rearm a disabled drone yourself before you can use it again. This is a feature that Merchant 1.0 had. You had to constantly interact with your own placed power in the environment to maximise your drone uptime. I think that's a really nifty feature that will make her distinct from Singularity, who does all this stuff passively, and Trapper, who just has to fucking deal with it. Plus, if stealth mode drones are turning back on, you'll need to set a tripwire direction, so manual reactivation gives you the means to manually pick a new direction, or take another blue beam shot, when an automatic reset doesn't let you do this. Lock-on stacks, the radar and claw trap mechanics all work exactly the same way they do on live, and once survivors are claw trapped, the deep wound, haste and hinder don't exist anymore. Instead, she just gets the EMP dart from the second design preview. Change a few add-ons round, and that's it. The gameplay loop is as follows. Send your drone somewhere and it'll zoom over to set itself up as a trap, but if it spots someone on the way, you can cancel its path to instead take a shot with the blue beam. It's a proper classic skill shot. If they don't dodge it, they get instantly claw trapped, but if they do, you'll probably end up wasting that drone. It's a risk-reward that recycled the mobile drone concept from 3.0 that everybody liked, but does it in a way that can't easily be used for 3gen or zone survivors. Instead, it becomes a remote way to collect information, set up traps, or take the occasional pot shot. Meaning she doesn't have the issue that Hag or Trapper have where she spends 12 years setting up. Assuming you didn't bluebeam anybody, it is now a tripwire trap until somebody steps in it and starts it spinning around. So the scan and stack system and drone rotation wizardry that makes current Merchant fun still exists in the power. It will also mean that if you play it against current era Merchant, there is less to learn now, since you'll know how this element of the power works already. When you're not using the bluebeam out of recon mode, you apply claw traps in much the same way that you do now. But instead of relying on haste and hinder to get that down, you have the drone buddy and EMP dart from the last design preview that will finish the job instead. The survivor counters to go with this are many and plentiful. When you step in a drone's active zone and get spotted, take cover from a potential blue beam. If the killer is close to you, you can run to gain distance, but if she's far away, you might want to take a risk and hang around so you can disarm the drone once it enters stealth mode. Avoid the tripwire so the drone stays in stealth mode as long as possible. If you enter a tile with a scouting mode drone, crouching, standing still, and using LOS breakers to evade a moving beam will be your priority, which will be easier than it used to be since now you'll only have one fully visible beam to worry about instead of two potentially invisible ones. And the stealth has been tweaked as well, which regularly meant that you wasted it while you were setting up, or got rewarded for randomly putting a drone down on a tile. Getting it on recalling an active drone means you have it exactly when you need it. You can potentially chain it together by recording multiple consecutive drones, but survivors can deny you your stealth at critical moments by disabling your drones. That is more interactive for the Skull Merchant player, more interactive for the survivors. It just feels like a win-win way to keep the mechanic around. I'm really proud of this design. It's got everything that's fun about Merchant right now maintained from the current iteration, while delivering more thoroughly both the identity that she used to have as an information collector, and the one that Behaviour wants to give her with her mobile drones and the EMP dart. As you can probably tell, I've put a shit ton of work into it, and I'm sure many of you are asking, why do I care so much? This killer has been forgotten by the overwhelming majority of the player base and the devs alike. So what is it about her that makes me so invested anyway? And, well, I've talked about it before. More than anything else in this game, Merchant feels like she's always been just made for me in so many ways. It's no secret I've been disillusioned with many of the new releases in the past couple of years, Houndmaster being the big exception. So Merchant to me is something pretty special. The more grounded and realistic backstory, her gorgeous cosmetics, the power that's got so much misunderstood depth and potential for skill expression that I've made hours of guides and videos about it. Like, am I not supposed to get attached to that? To want to keep enjoying the killer that fits me like a glove? And it's not unusual for fans and creators both in that side of the DBD community to get attached to a particular character like this. Every killer has their players, you know? These beautiful, obsessive lunatics who live and breed that character. You've got Lynxie for twins, you've got ZM Pixie for Knight, you've got Vampire Toothy for Unknown, Gummy Peach Rings for Hag, half the transfemme killer players on NA East for Wesker, and I'm pretty sure if any of their killers were under threat the way that Merchant is, they'd be reacting the same way. At the end of the day, I just want my favourite killer to be better because I think her players deserve better than a killer with half a power. Skull Merchant deserves better than grinding along the bottom of every tier list for an undisclosed amount of time with the only light at the end of the passageway being Behaviour finally putting her out of her misery by deleting her and replacing her with a fucking Dashlot body snatcher or something. And all those new players that you just got from the FNAF chapter in the anniversary, some of them have started to ask questions about Skull Merchant. Why this killer they've just bought doesn't seem to be doing anything useful. And they deserve a better experience than that. I'm tired of seeing people, many of whom are presumably new players, asking how to play Merchant now, and the prevailing answer being, you don't. That this killer has been soft kill switched, with our only recourse being some distant deadline that might just bury her completely, and that we're not going to meet anyway. I'm not demanding a rework immediately, I know that isn't reasonable, but this isn't a state that can continue. Something has to change, something has to be done, and quickly. A new ETA on the rework date, some interim buffs to tide us over until that date, and most importantly clear communication about why all these prior mistakes were made and how we're looking to avoid them in the future. I worry that I'm sounding entitled or excessively judgmental here, but I have to remind myself, the player bases of every other killer in this game don't have to worry about this sort of thing. They don't have to be worried about their killer being soft kill switched for well over a year. They could buy, learn and enjoy their characters without worrying about Behaviour deciding to intentionally break their new toy. Why is that a luxury that Merchant players aren't allowed to enjoy too? I'm just trying to hold behaviour to the mark and get my frustrations out there. And I hope the merchant players out there feel that I've expressed their sentiments properly too. Let me know in the comments if you think I've got it right, or if you think it's something that I've missed. And while you're at it, just in case anyone's forgotten, don't harass the fucking devs.